I don't know about you guys, but it feels like Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman might be the next fight to take place for the welterweight championship of the world. That's right, Kamaru Usman, in my opinion, is not going to be defending his belt against Jorge Masvidal next. It doesn't seem like we're going in that direction. It feels as though we're going in the direction of Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns, and I am A-okay with that one. I thought this might happen as soon as Gilbert Burns put on the performance that he did against Tyron Woodley at UFC Vegas, where he completely dominated Tyron Woodley in a similar fashion to Kamaru Usman. Not quite as impressive. However, he did really dominate Tyron Woodley, which is something that Kamaru Usman did. I thought that maybe the title shot could go to Gilbert Burns, but I was still somewhat hopeful that Masvidal was going to get the title shot versus Kamaru Usman. However, it feels as though over the past few days, we're shifting in the direction of Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman, and this started on Tuesday when the rankings changed. When Gilbert Burns was put as number 1 in the welterweight division, everything changed, and I started taking things really seriously about him getting the next title shot, because when you're number 1 in a division, that really helps the promotion if the guy who's challenging for the belt has a number 1 next to his name and not a number 2 or number 3. So if there was ever going to be a time where Gilbert Burns was going to earn a title shot, it would be now, while he's got all the momentum, while he's got the spotlight of the MMA community on him. Now would be the time to strike while Gilbert Burns' name is hot. I feel as though that might be the thing to do. Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman. Listen, Jorge Masvidal, as much as people like him, is not looking to accept the Kamaru Usman fight. In fact, Dana White yesterday came out and said that it's highly likely that Gilbert Burns receives the next welterweight title shot. Now, is Dana White playing a game? Is he trying to show Masvidal that, hey, if you're not willing to play ball, we're just going to move on with Gilbert Burns? Or is Dana White being serious? Because just today, Jorge Masvidal came out 25 minutes ago and said that if I'm not worth it, let me go, in terms of his contract negotiations for his fight with Kamaru Usman. I think we're going to see Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman, because I know for a fact that Jorge Masvidal is not going to get paid the money that he wants. And if he is not going to get paid the money that he wants, then he says himself that he's not going to be fighting for the belt next. He's not going to get the money that he wants to get right now because we have no crowds. We're in a financial situation right now where the UFC cannot afford to pay their fighters a massive amount of money out of nowhere. And that's why you see a lot of these fighters going after the UFC right now. They're in a situation where there's no crowds. They're not going to make a lot of money off of the events. They're not going to make a lot of money off of pay-per-views. They're not going to make a lot of money off of sponsorships as well. And now's the time that we hear these guys like Jorge Masvidal and John Jones going after the UFC for not giving them more money. Obviously, you're not going to get more money if the UFC itself is taking a huge paycheck cut just so that they can put events on. Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman is next. Let's talk about a prediction. I feel as though Gilbert Burns would win. I really do. Now, you could say that Gilbert Burns fought a worse Woodley than Kamaru Usman did. That's a very good point, I'll be honest with you. He probably did fight a different Woodley than Kamaru Usman did. However, I see the same Woodley that showed up against Kamaru Usman as I did that showed up against Gilbert Burns, a guy who was more than okay to lose, who just didn't want to get KO'd and was accepting bad positions just so he could get to the end of every round. That's exactly the Woodley I saw against Gilbert Burns. It's exactly the same Woodley I saw against Kamaru Usman. I feel as though Gilbert Burns might beat Kamaru Usman. Now, there's some heat behind this matchup because these two have trained together for a very long time at Hard Knocks 365 over with Henry Hooft. Kamaru Usman's been there for a while, so has Gilbert Burns. They've trained together. They've done hard sparring together. I feel as though there's going to be some animosity building up between this fight, and I don't think there's ever been a title fight in UFC history. And I'm trying to think of one right now where two guys in a small gym like Hard Knocks 365, although it's quite a big institute, it's not like AKA or it's not like ATT is a better example where you can train and not even know that another guy trains there. The compound is so big. This is Hard Knocks 365. They're in the same room as each other. This is going to be a very interesting title fight, and I'd like to see the hype and the build-up for it because, hey, if Masvidal's not going to come to the table for the Kamaru Usman fight, the only thing to do in the meantime would to be build the name of Kamaru Usman by having him defend a belt against a worthy challenger. Therefore, maybe Masvidal will be offered more now that Kamaru Usman is a bigger name. Who knows? But Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns, in my opinion, is the fight to make next. I feel as though Gilbert beats him, man. I really do. And I like Kamaru Usman, and the only reason I think that Kamaru Usman would stand a chance against Gilbert Burns is if this fight happens in the Apex Center. If this fight happens in the Apex Center with the smaller ring, it really does favor Kamaru Usman. When you're a wrestler, it's much easier to get a hold of your opponents when you're in that smaller ring. It's much easier to cut off the octagon. Kamaru Usman loves cage control. He's like the Holly Holm of the fucking UFC welterweight division. He loves just leaning against guys against a cage, having over-unders, smashing shots to the body. That's what Kamaru Usman does best, and in my opinion, that's the only way he's going to be able to beat Gilbert Burns. I don't see him taking down Gilbert Burns and just sitting on top of him the entire time without Gilbert Burns getting back to his feet or submitting him, because that just doesn't make any sense. When you look at the credentials of Gilbert Burns in jiu-jitsu, it makes zero sense to suggest that Kamaru Usman would just be able to dominate him on top. The one place that Kamaru Usman can win this fight, and it's definitely not the striking, because Gilbert Burns runs that realm, and we've seen in the Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington fight, Usman's striking is not the best in the world, neither is Colby Covington's. I feel like the Usman versus Covington fight was weird, because for a short few 25 minutes, or 23 minutes, however long the fight lasted overall, we saw these two wrestlers that had no business striking in the UFC, in a bubble with each other. So we took them as we looked at them and we said, these guys are great strikers, look how good they looked. If either of them were worried about a takedown in that fight, or if either of them had an opponent that was worried about takedowns, or wasn't worried about takedowns, that fight would be completely different. Okay? The only reason they looked so good on the feet was because they committed to staying on the feet the entire time. And the only reason they look so good on the feet is because the person that they're fighting is always worried about them taking them down. It's always in the back of their mind. That's why wrestlers seem to not have to work so hard to fill in the gaps around the striking department, because they always have the striker second-guessing themselves, leaving open opportunities. I don't think Gilbert Burns is going to be worried about being taken down by Kamaru Usman. And I feel like if Kamaru Usman is fighting a guy like Gilbert Burns, who is not going to be worried about being taken down, it's going to maybe expose Kamaru Usman's striking, because I know for a fact that Gilbert Burns is a better striker than Kamaru Usman. He just is. Look what he did to Damian Maia. Even on the feet with Tyron Woodley, Usman wanted nothing to do with being on the feet with Tyron Woodley. Every single time they were on the feet, Usman smothered him against the cage. Don't get me wrong, Usman had a moment in that third or fourth round where he was kind of beating up Woodley, but that was once Woodley had already gassed out completely and was just clinging on to for dear life. Like, Gilbert Burns stayed on the outside, moved and feinted around Tyron Woodley, and had no worry about Woodley's stand-up. To me, that tells me that Gilbert Burns is going to have the striking advantage here. I feel as though the only position that Kamaru Usman can win this fight is against the cage. In a smaller octagon, that actually is really going to favour him, because he's going to be able to hold guys against the cage a little bit easier, because they'll have less space to work around. Also, if Kamaru Usman does want to get on top, it's kind of hard to submit guys when you're crunched up against a cage and cramped in, and there's not really many places to manipulate yourself and go for a triangle and go for an armbar. So if Usman wants to play that game of just holding Gilbert Burns against a cage and sometimes taking him down, let's say with a minute left in the round, and pouring on some ground and pound there, that's the only way I see Kamaru Usman win. I just see way more avenues for success in Gilbert Burns. I know it seems like I'm always picking against Kamaru Usman, and I can't wait for the day that I finally do predict Usman to win a fight and he eventually does lose, because that seems to be the only thing that happens to me whenever these dominant champions come around. Even still, dominant champion as in dominant performances. I know he's only defended his belt once, but either way, Gilbert Burns is going to win against Kamaru Usman. I think he will. He's way more active recently. He fought Damian Maia, finished him with relative ease, then he turned right back around, fought Tyron Woodley, all within the same 6-month period. I think actually March to May. It's a 2-month period, but over this first 6 months where Usman has not had a fight, Gilbert Burns has been active against great opponents, and dare I mention, he took the Damian Maia fight on short notice. No, he didn't. He took the Woodley fight on short notice. He took the Damian Maia fight, made Maia look like nothing. I know it was a different Damian Maia, but still, you know, if Usman takes 5 rounds to do it, and, you know, Damian Maia took that fight against Kamaru Usman on short notice. Not a lot of people remember that, but Kamaru Usman was supposed to be fighting Santiago Ponzinibbio in the main event of that event in Argentina, I believe, before Damian Maia came in on short notice, and Kamaru Usman still took him 5 rounds and put the entire audience to sleep. Gilbert Burns went out there and destroyed him. Against Tyron Woodley, Gilbert Burns should not be able to do that, and I feel like watching the Gilbert Burns versus Tyron Woodley fight, I didn't think greater of Burns, although I did a little bit. I thought less of Usman after the Burns versus Woodley fight. Because before that fight, I picked Woodley to beat Gilbert Burns, by the way, and I ate my fucking words big time. I thought Woodley was going to catch Burns in the second round, finish him, defend the takedowns, keep it on the feet, and just blast Burns out of there in the second round. But Burns beating Woodley just made me lose a bit of respect for what Usman did to Woodley, because then it made me think, hang on a second, Colby Covington would do that to Woodley. Before I was a little bit iffy about the Woodley versus Covington fight, but I thought Covington would beat Woodley, but I've never been more confident in Covington than I have been now. I think that the performance that Burns gave against Woodley showed us that maybe Usman beating Woodley the way he did wasn't a one-off, and wasn't just how great Usman was. It may have been, hey, that's kind of just the way to beat Tyron Woodley. Pressure against the cage. Rory McDonald did it, took him down as well. Jake Shields did it, took him down as well. We've seen that game plan used on Woodley before. No one else seems to use it, but now that it has been used, I feel like we found a hole in Woodley's game, and I'm not giving Usman as much credit as I once did. I feel as though Gilbert Burns would beat him. I do. I think it's a great fight to have in the meantime, because right now we've got Masvidal asking for more money. Even though we're in a financial crisis, he knows he's not going to get more pay. Usman versus Burns. And I've built an entire card around it, by the way, which we're going to get to right now if I just load it up. I've built an entire card, UFC 252, and I think it's a great card, and I need you to pay attention here. August 8th, UFC 252, Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa as the main event, Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns as the co-main event, Leon Edwards versus Stephen Thompson as a fight in between the card as well. I did have Claudia Gadelha versus Carla Esparza booked here as well, which I think still should be booked. They should cancel Carla Esparza's fight with Marina Rodriguez, or whoever she just signed to fight, because it's not interesting whatsoever. Make the Claudia Gadelha versus Carla Esparza rematch. Scrap the fight that Esparza just signed. Put that on this card. Charles Oliveira versus Diego Ferreira on the main card as well. Brad Riddell versus Renato Moicano on the card. Kyra France versus the Formiga versus Perez winner. Makhmud Muradov versus Rodolfo Vieira. Rodrigo Nascimento Ferreira versus Marcos Rodrigo de Lima. Great names. A Brazil versus City kickboxing kind of card, and a Nigerian kind of card as well, because you've got Adesanya and Kamaru Usman in the main and co-main event. I think that would be a great card. It would give Kamaru Usman a little bit more spotlight, because Adesanya versus Costa is a very highly anticipated fight card. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be tuning into that, and not a lot of people would tune into Usman versus Burns on its own. So I think putting them as the co-main event would get them more notoriety. Then the winner of that one's probably going to have an easier time negotiating with Jorge Masvidal, because right now the stars know they can't get paid what they want, because we're in the situation we're in with no crowds. They know they're not going to get paid what they want, but they're making it seem like they want to fight. But the UFC's just not letting them because they're not paying them enough. They know the UFC can't pay them more than what they get their last fight. They know that. The UFC is not going to be offering paychecks and pay increases and promotions in terms of how much you get paid on contracts during a financial crisis. All of these stars know that. But they're just playing the game to make it seem like they want to fight. I say, you know what? Fuck them both. Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns. That way you punish Kamaru Usman by not giving him the money fight. You punish Jorge Masvidal for not playing ball. And you give Gilbert Burns the shot that he's earned. Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman. I love the fact that they've trained together. And not to mention, I should mention this before the end, Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman. Gilbert Burns was at Hard Knocks 365 as a lightweight. I'm sure that Kamaru Usman did not intend for Gilbert Burns to rise through the rankings and get a welterweight title shot that quickly upon joining the welterweight division. Because let's face it, Gilbert Burns took a short notice opponent in, I think it was Thiago Alves, maybe at the time. No, it wasn't. Was it Thiago Alves? I don't even know who it was. He took a short notice opponent with Alexei Kunchenko, beat him. Kunchenko fought Alves. That's what I'm thinking of, and Alves took it on short notice. Burns fought Kunchenko, beat him. Burns fought Gunnar Nelson, beat him in what felt like both on short notice fights, and very quickly this happened. Then he jumped in against Damian Maia, destroyed him in the first round, and he jumps in on short notice against Tyron Woodley, destroys him. I feel like momentum's on Burns' side, and I think he's going to get the win against Kamaru Usman. I just don't see a way that Kamaru Usman can stay safe and be in a positive situation for 5 rounds without leaving himself vulnerable. Kamaru Usman, in my opinion, if he wants to take Burns to the ground, he's going to be in for a list of problems. A real list of problems, because Gilbert Burns' grappling is no fucking joke, and I feel as though if Kamaru Usman was on top of him in half guard, or even full guard on top, Burns is going to probably get back to his feet or submit him. I imagine he would try a submission, because that way it would offset Kamaru Usman wanting to go for a takedown again in that fight. On the feet, Gilbert Burns is going to have a huge advantage. The only way Usman wins is if he can be patient and just hold Gilbert Burns against the cage for 5 rounds. And we know how quickly the referees like to separate things nowadays. I don't think it favours Kamaru Usman. However, if they're in a smaller cage, I may consider switching my prediction. But if we're getting back to live events in the real cage with a big space for Gilbert Burns to move around in, I'm going to go with Gilbert Burns winning. And I think he would finish Kamaru Usman, because I'll just tell you this. If you're getting rocked by Colby Covington, problems. There's real problems. And my voice just lowered for that, because there's real fucking problems. If you're getting rocked by Colby Covington, who has said it himself, he throws 20% shots. If you're getting rocked by him, you're going to get rocked by Burns. What's happened to my voice? Jesus Christ. I've just lost my voice, I think. So, yeah, goodbye. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Burns would win. Masvidal's being weird. Click the button there. Nothing new. Goodbye.